Screen is visible. Yeah. So first and foremost, wishing you all a very happy Doctor's Day. And it's this is a beautiful topic. I think for me this is personally very special because my mother is a microbiologist, and all my life, the theory of hygiene is what I've learned since I was a child, right? And I remember, always growing up drinking, boiled water all the time, and we're not even allowed to put our water bottles, face down with the tip on the ground, because my mother thought that that's an unhygienic practice from a microbiologist perspective. So I think this is a great topic to discuss, and this is today we're going to discuss in the next 10 minutes the history of hygiene. Now, in the next 10 minutes, I am going to take you through a journey of almost the entire human history. So it's a tough task for me, but I had a lot of fun making this presentation, and I hope really that you have a lot of fun listening to this. So we'll start our journey back in before Christ, right, in the BC era, and a lot of these things you might be already knowing, but a lot of things will be very surprising to you as well. So I hope this it's a very interesting history if you talk about hygiene. And the word hygiene itself comes from Hygeia, who is the Greek goddess of health, who was the daughter of the god of medicine. So hygiene and medicine have a very strong link together. And I think it would be fair to say that understanding hygiene is one of the cornerstones of medicine. Just like pharmacology, or just like clinical skills are important, understanding the skills of hygiene are equally important. Now, if we talk about the ancient world before Christ, there were some spurts of developments of hygiene. Now, very interestingly, India was one of the countries which actually led as far as the concepts of hygiene are concerned. And if you talk about ancient India, some of the earliest accounts of hygiene can be found in the religious texts of the Hindus, and bathing, which, and you'll be very surprised, bathing is something which we do every day, but it's relatively, as a cultural thing, it's relatively new. We're not been bathing for many years until very recently. So thankfully, ancient India understood the importance of bathing, and bathing was one of the 5 nitya karmas or daily duties in Hinduism, and not performing it was considered a sin according to some scriptures. So ancient India did understand the importance of taking a bath. Whereas, if you talk about Greeks and Romans, the Greeks and Romans loved these community baths, right? So you have all seen this, if you've gone to Greece or if you've gone to Italy, you'd have seen this, large, public bathroom, public pools. This was not only a center for bathing, which was a part of hygiene, but this was also a place where, there's a lot of diplomacy done, a lot of business deals made. So this was a community kind of thing. So community public baths were very, very common in the Greek and Roman times. Now, if you talk about some other civilizations, again, we talk about China, where, the first toilet paper actually came from China. And if you talk about, pumice stones were used in the past like soaps, and pumice is even today considered to be one of the ways of cleaning yourself. And the Egyptians were the people who actually pioneered cleaning the teeth, and it was very popular, to keep good dental hygiene during that era of the world. So this is the origins of the hygiene in the ancient world. Now we'll take a journey to 1500s. So in the 1500s, this was known as the Elizabethan Era, and this was the time of Elizabeth I. Now, as far as hygiene is concerned, perhaps this was the worst time in history of human civilization as far as hygiene was concerned. This at this point of time, things were so bad that there was no water treatment plant. So water was so dirty and considered unfit to drink. And people, including children, you'll be surprised, people, including children, often drank wine and ale for most part, right? Because the water was not safe to drink. Now, if you read the Game of Thrones, if you're a big fan of Game of Thrones like me, or like Dr. Nagesh, who is here, or if you read some of this medieval history, you often find people going to places, ale houses, to drink ale, and you'll be always surprised. They're drinking ale. They're not drinking water, right? Because water was never very fit to drink. So that was one of the striking features there. And again, during the medieval times, there were bathhouses, but then bathhouses were frowned upon by the Catholic Church. They often felt that apart from spreading diseases, they would also spread some other illegal activities. And I understand, and I hope you understand what you mean by that. So it was something which was not really considered to be very a great idea, and it was often frowned upon by the medieval church. And if you talk about bathing per se, the lower citizens would often bath once about 2 or 3 times a year, right? So that and including the royalty who could actually afford bathing, they would also bath maybe once or twice around a month, including Queen Elizabeth, who would often had long baths, but she would bath about once a month or so. So bathing was considered to be an optional activity. But the successor to Queen Elizabeth I is this famous guy called James VI, and this guy never took a bath in his life, right? Never took a bath. That's what the accounts tell us, and this is the monarch who would never bath. I'm sure people around him might have had some kind of olfactory adaptation to him, because not bathing at all, and he had actually some form of hysteria, some form of aversion to bathing, and in fact actually felt that bathing is something bad, right? So he would not bath at all, and this was the Elizabethan era, right? So not a very great time as far as hygiene is concerned, right? And then we go to the 1800s. Now, the 1800s is a period when actually the development of the progress in hygiene actually took place. So this century was the most important century for development of the hygiene hypothesis and the hygiene per se. So in 1800s, the first big name was Ignace Semmelweis, whose birthday we are celebrating today. Dr. Ganpati already gave you a very detailed introduction of Dr. Ignace. He's also called the savior of mothers. And he did something very simple, very simple. What he did was he just asked people to wash their hands, just washing the hands. And who would have thought that this small act of just washing your hands would have such far-reaching consequences so as to reduce peripartum deaths? And he in fact published a lot of these things, and you'd be surprised. This simple act was also found. This was also there's a lot of resistance to this simple thing as well. So even though this seems very second nature to us, every child who comes home after playing in the mud knows that he has to clean his hand, wash his hands. This is what every mother says to every child. Whether your mother is a microbiologist or not, I'm sure every mother would tell you to wash your hands. But this was something which was not really practiced all the time in that period. And what it really tells me, to me, what it tells is some of the most greatest invention of humankind are the most simplest of inventions. Most simple things, right, have changed history to a huge extent, right? And this is one such example of a very simple thing which has changed life altogether. And then you have Dr. Jon Snow, right? Now, not to be confused with the other namesake Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. We were talking about Game of Thrones a few minutes back. So Jon Snow is famous for being called, nothing Jon Snow, right? But thankfully, Dr. Jon Snow was somebody who knew a lot. He's in fact considered the father of modern epidemiology. Now, if you understand Dr. Jon Snow, he was like a Sherlock Holmes of 1800s, right? He was an English physician. He was a leader in development of anesthesia and also leader in development of medical hygiene. So he has its hands in many places, and he's considered one of the founders of modern epidemiology, because what he did was in 1854 there was a big outbreak of cholera, and he traced these cases, and what he found was that everything was basically because of handles of water pump which was transmitting this infection, and that is where the fecal-oral route, and that is where he basically asked the people to remove the handle of the water pump, right? It was such a simple thing which led to such in fact the cholera epidemic could be stopped because of this simple act. So Dr. Jon Snow, a big salute to him. One of the modern pioneers of both hygiene, anesthesia, as well as medical epidemiology. And then you have Thomas Crapper. Now, Thomas Crapper is a funny name. well, he is not a funny guy, but he's a businessman. So he's not a doctor, but he holds a very important place in the history of hygiene. So much so that some people believe that the word crap, and please mind my language, but the word crap actually comes from him. That is what it has been said, right? So it's often seen in the popular culture. Basically, Thomas Crapper was the one who actually made the flush, right? So the toilet flush, which we all know, was again not something which came intuitively. It was actually invented by this guy called Thomas Crapper, and it was so popular. It became such a popular cultural hit thing. Just like a lot of viral things we have today. Often, these it is said that the American servicemen who were stationed in England, they'd often when they would use these toilets, they would often say, "I'm going to use the crapper," and from that, it is thought that the word crap actually comes from his name, right? So unfortunately, he made a big contribution to the humankind by inventing the flush in a toilet, but unfortunately his name got malaligned in that process. And then you have Mr. Lister, Joseph Lister, in 1867. Now, Joseph Lister is another father. He's a father of modern antisepsis, and he is one of the uh, pioneering surgeon. He's a British surgeon. He's considered an excellent surgeon, right? So much so that this is the Victorian era, and he was the personal surgeon to Queen Victoria. In fact, there is a big, it's a very well-known fact that he was one of the person who actually operated or removed the boil from the armpits of Queen Victoria, which is, I think, no small feat in that era, I'm sure. So, from a technical point of view, as an exceptional surgeon, but one of his major contribution to the world was his practice of you know revolutionizing surgery from the means of using antisepsis, right? So he was the first to actually introduce carbolic acid, which is now known as phenol, to sterilize surgical instruments and to clean wounds of these patients, right? And then he also applied the knowledge from Louis Pasteur about advances in microbiology. He understood the role of microbes in causing wound infection, and he completely changed the practice of surgery. From surgery, so you can see very interestingly, there are two people who in this both are have collaborative action in hygiene as well as surgery. One was one of the person who brought anesthesia, Dr. John Snow, as well as Joseph Lister, who brought to us the modern antisepsis. And these two things have literally changed the practice of surgery. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a big legion of surgeons today. Surgery would be something which would eventually it might have just vanished if you did not have these two people. So this is 1800s, and now let's come to 1900s. So 1900s, there was one big contribution which we must mention, right? Why? Because of this irony which is there, and this is Dr. Wu Lin Tay. Now, Dr. Wu Lin Tay is a Chinese, right? And he's a guy who is a Chinese, ethnic Chinese, but he actually did most of his education from Cambridge, and he went back to China. And in 1910 to 1911, there was the Manchurian epidemic in China of the influenza, and this was a huge epidemic. And at this point of time, Wu Lin Tay actually pioneered the use of face mask to prevent diseases, right? And what we talk about mask yourself and masking ourselves, and we also see the role of China in this current epidemic. But the irony is that the coronavirus came from China, but also the mask came from China, right? So using a mask as a prophylactic apparatus was first invented by the Chinese. And this was an era which there was a lot of discussion on social and sexual hygiene as well. So this is an era of sexual hygiene. As you can see here, a very interesting cartoon which deciphers people to go through two sides. One is a hygienic maintaining sexual hygiene, whereas the other is the era of prostitution and all. So this is the social hygiene and sexual hygiene movement. There's a lot of talk about sexual education, use of preventive care in prevent venereal diseases and regulate prostitution, etc. So this was the era, and this was also the period where you had the American Society of Social and Sexual Hygiene, which later became American Society of Sexual Medicine, which was first formed. So this is, I think, the closest we get to endocrinology, because I think sexual medicine to some extent has close relations with endocrinology as well. So this is the 1900 era. And finally, let's come to the 21st century. And I think this is the era where we need to really practice another form of hygiene, and that is digital hygiene, right? So digital hygiene is something, well, there are two aspects of it. One is, of course, we are all have that habit of taking our mobile phones to our Thomas Crapper's inventions. You know what I mean? I think, and there are a lot of studies that the screen of a mobile phone contains more germs than than perhaps a sewer. So that's the reality. But I think, there's nothing much we can do. I think we have to attend phones when we are in the crapper. But at the end of the day, there's another form of digital hygiene, that is to maintain, a little bit, away from digital spaces, social media and all this. And I think all of us, you are listening to this, perhaps need to rethink our use of digital spaces compared to real life spaces. So I think this is an era which is going to redefine the digital hygiene, and perhaps again, there will be some pioneers who would come with simple inventions, which is really going to change the world totally. So this is my presentation, this is my deliberation. And again, thank you for a patient listening, and I hope you really enjoyed this. Thank you.